Hello, this is Quentin from ServiceNow. I'm recording this quick demo video because I got a question from a customer today that was asking me, hey Quentin, how do you manage long-running process as you orchestrate a process with ServiceNow and using Flow Designer or Process Automation Designer? If there is a task, a step as part of the workflow that's getting out, making an outbound call to an API, and then we want the flow to wait for some kind of callback from the external system. How do you implement this? So I figured I should test that out before I suggest and show the solution to the customer. So take this as just me, Quentin, showing you one way of doing this. Always refer to the official ServiceNow documentation and get advice from a ServiceNow partner or a certified solution architect or admin or developer. I'm sure there's many different ways of doing this, but that's one way I will do if that was my implementation. I created a workflow here that's making an API outbound call. It doesn't really matter the use case. The use case is working out of obviously the incident table because that's a commonly used table when you use ServiceNow. I'm gonna take one record here and copy the value of the incident number because I'm gonna need it as I'm testing that flow. So that workflow as a trigger is gonna work on that incident record I just copied. It's making an API call. Doesn't really matter what endpoint I'm integrating with. I'm just using a Spock action I've built earlier today. This is just to illustrate this in the demo. The workflow is gonna make an API call, and then I've implemented a wait for condition, very commonly used step in a workflow. That workflow is gonna wait for a certain condition, and I like to base every decision based on a status on a record status that's changed, and that record status I can change it via an API, and that's what I'm gonna be doing for the callback. Here I'm just waiting for the incident status to be closed, and then I'm just logging something, right? That's basically my callback. The API call that's going to be made by the external system is going to change that record. It's going to change the state to close. What that means is that the flow will capture that change and automatically continue to the next step. So that's how I will design in no code, very simple way, a long running process with some pause or wait for certain condition. So I can maybe start by running that workflow, and then we can dive into a little bit more detail. I'm going to put the incident number, click run. The flow is executed. Actually, I like to show the execution view. I could have clicked the link to show you the log. If I click on the execution tab, you should see my flow here waiting, right? That flow has an execution ID, which can be important to even pass to when you make that outbound API call, you could pass this to the external system. So the external system could, get the status of the flow if needed. I'm just gonna copy it so I can use it later. So for my callback, I've created a REST endpoint. Basically, I'm using the feature of Flow Designer, which is a Flow REST API trigger. So that's how you manage Asynchronous, right? So here you can quickly define a flow that has a Flow API trigger. Historically, people will create some REST API endpoint, old school way on ServiceNow, but I think it's easy with no code to just create a Flow API trigger. So that's basically creating my new endpoint, and you can define whatever query parameter that API endpoint is gonna use. That's what my external system is gonna use to make the callback to ServiceNow. So I just define this very quickly. I'm just gonna pass an incident number, a close note. Maybe there is some kind of identifier to make this more, real and secure. But that's will be too complicated for me to build in just a simple demo. And then I'm performing a lookup of the record that I'm getting an incident number here. I'm making a lookup and updating that incident record. So that task, that workflow will be executed upon, from the API call made from the external system. So that's kind of how it works. And by triggering that API, that workflow, this will get that condition to match and that flow to move on to the next step. So first, because I know this question comes all the time when I present this different solution, I want to show you how you can first get the flow execution status. This is one way of doing this. I have other creative way to retrieve information about the workflow, but the easiest way is to use that table API queries is going to the 6 flow context and pass the execution ID. The execution ID, when you make the outbound API call, you can look that up and send this to your other endpoint so they could retrieve it, right? So because I did copy paste of the execution ID that I'm using of the flow that I executed in front of you in the demo, I'm gonna pass it there and click send. By doing this, I'm querying the workflow and I should be able to see the status, see the flow is in status waiting at some point. But for my use case, not really necessary, but I wanted to show you how you could retrieve API workflow status from a remote system. Now that we've done this, I wanted to show you the callback. I was showing you here if I go back to my API outbound trigger, that new endpoint that I created in Flow Designer, I'm gonna use this for my external system. I'm using here Postman to make the callback, right? So I'm gonna send a bunch of data that's gonna trigger the flow, update the incident record, and that will match the condition of my other flow, which is gonna cause the flow to move to the next step. So at this point, I think I already hard-coded here the incident number. So I'm gonna make a call to that API endpoint on ServiceNow, and this will get the flow to complete and continue. And that generates also an execution ID, because what I'm doing here is triggering a specific flow that I've created for the callback. And if I go in the operation tab, the flow here that was waiting, normally if everything is okay, it's complete. So that step here, just move to the next step, because the API trigger that I've used basically update that particular record, and that caused the condition to be met, and then move to the next step. So for me, it's a simple design. I'd love to get your opinion if you are looking at this. There may be other ways to do this, but I find using this out-of-the-box wait for condition and using an API, a flow REST API trigger is kind of easy. Instead of starting to build some script and REST API webhook, this is pretty native to ServiceNow and no code. So let me know what you think.